Hey everybody, welcome back. In today's video, I want to think through some complicated propositions that were put forward by Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson in a recent discussion put on by the Pangburn Philosophy Publishing Group, which hasn't been technically released to the public, but through the magic of the internet has become available. And both of these guys have been very influential to me as a thinker. I've been following Sam Harris since about 2010 when I first came across his letter to a Christian nation, and since then I've read The Moral Landscape, I've read his book on free will, and I've been very interested in his ideas of free will, as well as how mindfulness in the moment can help to reduce suffering. At the same time, Jordan Peterson has taken the internet by storm, and I have followed his work since about 2016. I think what he has to say about depth psychology, Jung, Freud, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, is fabulously interesting. I love listening to him. I think he's an incredible scholar, and so when these two guys got together and had their conversation, I found it extremely riveting. I've listened to all 5.5 hours of both nights, and I want to think through some of my thoughts and get some of your feedback. So I'm going to read something, and I hope that by reading it I'll come to a better understanding of my own thoughts, and I'd love to hear what you all have to say as well. This is something I've written, an essay called Being and Becoming, a response to the propositions of Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. I've been listening to a leaked audio of Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson's discussion/debate, a grainy audience-recorded audio in which the crowd's applause and occasional shouts of "lobster" are foreground to the clash of intellects I envision on a stage, hosting three of the most articulate scholars of our time. This recording has filled me with visions, great and terrible, of the world's religious stories, the great mythologies of the past clashing with the facts of the present, and the echoes of this discussion recurring down the ages. This is the great conversation that was formerly written and spoken in private rooms of universities, in the libraries of Alexandria and Plato's Academy. Now it rides upon the waves of new technological innovation and has reached me again and driven me here to think aloud my thoughts on these my favorite problems. Can we derive values from facts? Are stories the fundamental bedrock upon which all ethical and moral hierarchies are structured? To both answers, I say yes. Yes to Harris' conception of the moral landscape, and yes to Peterson's chaos-order dichotomy that gives rise to the mythologies that structure the archetypes and the architecture of our lives. They are both correct, and their views, or I should say, the fundamental claims which undergird their views, are compatible. They may not know it, but I am going to attempt to show how they can coexist in a single theoretical moral and ethical framework. Their differences are not irreconcilable. They are like software which act to update one another, as the articulate and wonderfully intelligent moderator Brett Weinstein, like the Bagel Company, add a W, said at the beginning of their second discussion. First, facts give rise to values, and it is essential that we begin to recognize this fact and embrace it for the liberating truth that it is. Facts are the most fundamental components of life. Without the speed of light constant in a vacuum, the energy of a quantum of radiation to its frequency, or the structure of what English speakers call water as 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen, life would be impossible. Could these values have been otherwise? Perhaps. Perhaps they might even be otherwise in some tangential universe, if such a place exists. As far as we know, the constants are constant. And if they were tweaked even slightly, and I mean slightly, the Planck distance, for example, is precise down to 34 places after the decimal. Life as we know it would in no way be possible. Now, this smorgasbord of facts, which seems to have conspired to generate life, and maybe even your life, are as value-free as can possibly be imagined. But religious people of all stripes are more than happy to get the cart before the horse time and again and claim these facts as having been fine-tuned for them. Well, to borrow Peterson's lovely phrase, not so fast, bucko. To claim these facts, these universal constants that exist in the vast space of unlife, as much as they exist in the infinitesimally small space of life, as tuned for individuals as unimportant as me and you, is too solipsistic to be real in any imaginable sense. That is to say, we emerge as a consequence of these facts about the universe being what it is, in much the same way that the lilies of a field grow from a ground amenable to lilies. The ground is indifferent to the life and death of any of the lilies, all of the lilies, and even to itself. Thus, facts comprise the unfeeling, unbiased, value-free fabric out of which the patterns of life emerge like budding plants. And out of this growth of life, values necessarily spring like the lily's brilliant flowers, tiger-spotted, fuchsia, and radiant white. So in much the same way Jung argued that the individual ego emerges out of the collective unconscious, life emerges from a set of facts about the world, and values emerge from this set of factual circumstances about life to guide, direct, manipulate, and personify life, to give it a conscious story, perhaps even the story of consciousness. The simple argument stands in no contradiction to David Hume's so-called is-ought distinction, but directly contradicts the so-called naturalistic fallacy. Hume's argument is simple. When making a logical syllogism, or enthymeme, you cannot get terms out of a conclusion that don't appear in the premises, especially claims about what should be from what is. Yes, in terms of pure logic, you get out what you put in. Is in the premises, is in the conclusion. But this isn't the world of pure logic. This is the natural world of facts and the life that emerge from the unbiased substrate, struggling up to the sunlight. Did we have a choice in this struggle to new heights and basic survival? Could the redwoods choose to grow shorter, to not reach the canopy of their elders? Is this really a question? We focus so much on is and ought when we discuss these questions of values. What of must? What choice did we have when our numbers were down to 3,000 survivors and we were scratching through the rubble with sticks? Our nature comes from nature, horrible and wonderful as it is. And if we trace it back to its origins, we find facts about the universe around and in us, down to the atomic structure of our DNA. Cultures, societies, and their values, shared and unique, arose from it. But the human endowment is not merely cultural. We are not blank slates. We are born into the world with a biological history stretching into the dawn of physics. Enough. Let me be brief. Hume never said you can't get an ought from an is. He would have been laughed out of the University of Edinburgh Library. If ought didn't come from is, where did it come from? Isn't? No. It is born in the mediation between becoming and being, between what isn't yet and that which is known. In Peterson's powerful words, between unknown chaos and known order. Further, no values that emerge from the field of facts are a priori true, in contrast to what Kant has to say. The facts are a priori to life, and it is the facts as they relate to life itself that gives rise to values. But that doesn't mean that value systems aren't necessary, even if they're not true. Why are a priori value systems like Kant's categorical imperative necessary? No one said it with more force than old Kant's harshest critic, Friedrich Nietzsche. There came a time when people scratched their heads. Some still scratch them today. There had been dreamers, first and foremost, old Kant. By virtue of a faculty, he had said, or at least meant. But is that really an answer? An explanation? Or instead just a repetition of the question? So how does opium cause sleep? By virtue of a faculty, namely the virtus dormitiva, replies the doctor in Molière. Cui est in eu virtus dormitiva, cujus est naturus sensus assupire. But answers like this belong in comedy. And the time has finally come to replace the Kantian question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, with another question. Why is the belief in such judgments necessary? To realize, in other words, that such judgments must be believed true for the purpose of preserving beings of our type, which is why these judgments could, of course, still be false. Or, to be blunt, basic, and clearer still, synthetic judgments a priori do not have to be possible at all. We have no right to them, and in our mouths they are nothing but false judgments. It is only the belief in their truth that is necessary as a foreground belief and piece of visual evidence belonging to the perspective optics of life. Beyond Good and Evil, Chapter 11. I cannot say it any better than this, except by perhaps quoting an Ubermensch in his own right, Christopher Hitchens. Synthetic a priori values are possible and necessary because without them, the Jews would not have made it to Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments. As I said before, these values emerge from the field of facts interwoven with life like the petals to the flowers of the lily, attracting pollinators to ensure the survival of the species. That doesn't make them true. It makes them effective at pushing life forms like us forward into the future. Belief in their veracity has so far been fundamental for life to emerge and flourish, and so, in fact, they may well be false, but necessary for beings like us to survive. The question that necessarily arises, what would stand in their place if the petals were pruned? It is therefore necessary for us to be careful here, for we run the risk of cutting something vital in the service of clearing the ground for some new value system to emerge from the field of facts that has become open to us. Because Peterson is correct that the story of values, of consciousness, of the survival of the human race is the fundamental conceptual framework for meaning as an antidote to what Nietzsche called laisser-aller, or nihilism, on the one hand, and tyranny on the other. And in this, Jordan Peterson's claims of the resurrection narrative, what Estes terms life, death, life, nature, are fundamentally true, and I mean that literally as well as metaphorically. Look only to the cycles of life, the death of winter and the rebirth of spring, in which the fields, the trees, and the animals that inhabit and consume them emerge from the essence of past life and flourishing, as well as emerge from those deeper levels of nature that reach down to the very core of the earth and the particles that make up its center. This story is littered with the bones of our ancestors, which the cycles of science and mythology have processed, grown, animated to life and death, decomposed, recycled, refined, changed, and reborn in the ever-changing, ever-recurring seasons. In this way, life is a narrative at its most fundamental level, characterized by facts, known and unknown, and value judgments about those facts arising from them like the leaves of a great tree. This great spirit of interconnected resurrection and adaptation is truly the greatest story ever told, on so grand a scale that every other story is merely a part of its root system, its branches, its system of xylem and phloem, or perhaps but a single shingle of bark. So as Joyce rejoiced at Ulysses' end, so I rejoice in the language that has been given this greatest of all discussions, and I want to know where it goes and where I have gone wrong. It seems clear to me that like the two halves of the yin-yang, Peterson and Harris, and you can make your decision about which is yin and which is yang, have painted half the picture each. Harris is right. Our values come from the facts of the universe, both known and unknown, and open for interpretation and revision, because we may be precise, though not accurate, when it comes to our understanding of the facts. Furthermore, a morality grounded in these value-based facts is the proper response to combating moral relativism on the left and fundamental dogmatism on the right. But he underestimates the power of religious stories and mythologies to shape our history, to have instantiated themselves in an ontological sense into our being, into the fabric of our lives. In other words, belief in the useful but technically false became true enough through repetition, eventually even becoming the sacred. But again, caution is the best way forward. When we find the golden calves amid the clutter of our religious baggage, we must not smash the 10 Commandments upon them in our haste to clear the way. In other words, as we clean out the dead wood from our past beliefs, it is essential that we do not dispense with the value of stories as such, as the process by which we mediate between becoming and being. For truly, what is a story before it is told? Becoming. And what is it after it's told? Being. And what of the stories like those of the great Homer, whose epic masterpieces have such power that Tolstoy himself called the Iliad a miracle? For 3,000 years, that story has vibrated flesh and moved bones to move mountains in search of truth within the rubble of the past. This is the domain of what Peterson calls the most real, because of its unbelievable power to shape the world through us. In this way, Peterson's claim regarding the buried wisdom in stories of the past is so essential that we must not, in our haste to upgrade our software, lose those vital programs that have seen us through the jungles and tundra of our past. A new day is dawning, and a new landscape is emerging on the waves of the net. As Nietzsche so envisioned, if your ship has been driven into these seas, very well. Now clench your teeth. Keep your eyes open. Keep a firm hand on the helm. We sail straight over morality and past it. We flatten. We crush perhaps what is left of our own morality, venturing to voyage thither. But what do we matter? Never yet has a deeper world of insight revealed itself to daring travelers and adventurers. And the psychologist who in this fashion brings a sacrifice, it is not the sacrificio de intellecto, on the contrary, will at least be entitled to demand in return that psychology shall again be recognized as the queen of sciences to serve and prepare for which the other sciences exist. For psychology is now once again the road to the fundamental problems. Beyond Good and Evil, chapter 23. I am eternally grateful to the forces and facts that brought me here to value this and you and our place in it. Thank you.